So I know a few people here. I know a few people here in this meetings, and others we are getting to know today. So it's great that you all have the time to come and listen to this information session. So that's great. Have you started? No. Are you about to? Here we go. Super. So basically what Katja and I are going to do first, and we try to keep it as short as possible, is just to run you a bit through what this whole research network is, and then what the funding opportunities are, kind of what our research focus is, and then kind of the more kind of technical stuff with eligibility criteria and so on, and things to think about when you think about applying for the funding. As Katja said, my name is Berit Bliesemann de Guevara. I'm the principal investigator. I'm leading on this research network, which is called Creating Safer Space, Strengthening Civilian Protection Amidst Violent Conflict. If we can go to the next slide, Katja. And so we are part of a kind of bigger portfolio of research networks, which are all looking into kind of peace building processes and protection processes in the widest sense. So our specific network tries to understand unarmed civilian protection and self-protection from kind of violence in different contexts. And we also aim to kind of support the work that is being done in this area of unarmed or non-violent civilian protection on the ground. So basically, I mean, the real focus on, you will see when we come to the point where I expand a bit more on what potential research areas are. We are quite open to all sorts of ideas, but the core of what we're interested in is how civilians can contribute to keeping other civilians safe in context of political violence or war, but without they themselves using or threatening force. So having non-violent approaches to this protection. Now, when you write a proposal to get this kind of network funding, you have to set out what the core countries are that you will be looking at and working with. So our core countries that we started off with are Colombia, South Sudan, Myanmar, and the Philippines. But as you will see later on, we also fund projects in other low and middle income countries. Now, the low and middle income countries kind of focus is one of the requirements of our funder. So there are broad opportunities there for projects looking at all sorts of types of political violence and forms of civilian protection from many different contexts to consider whether this would be something for you. The funding comes from the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So that's one of the big research councils we have in the United Kingdom. And it is financed through the Global Challenges Research Fund. So this in turn is part of the official development assistance. So it's basically money that comes from the government for official development assistance, and part of that is set aside for research on global challenges, kind of protection being one of these global challenges. So here is kind of a little map of where we are located, and this is just like the core academic team and the core NGO partners with whom we started the project. So Katja and I are based at Aberystwyth University in the UK. This is from where we lead the project in kind of administrative terms. And we also have Durham University and Leeds Beckett University in the UK on board. We have the City University of New York. Our colleague Nerv McCaskbach is based there in the US. We are working with colleagues at the University in Colombia, and also with two civil society organizations there. Then we have Strathmore University in Kenya as a partner, and have partner organizations in Kenya and South Sudan. And we have Chulalongkorn University in Thailand as our partner university, and then NGO partners in in kind of Thailand, Myanmar, and the Philippines. So that's the kind of core network. And we'll talk a bit more about all the other countries that can apply a bit later. So what do networks do? So this specific type of research network funded through the AHRC is called a Network Plus. And the plus bit is the bit for which we are here today, which is the research funding, so the commissioned research that we are able to support. But networks do much more. And there are kind of two other strands of activity that networks are supposed to do. One is about networking, so bringing people together around a specific topic based on their expertise or their research interests, and kind of providing kind of capacity enhancement activities around research for them. And the other strand is then to really think about how to distribute all those kind of research findings that hopefully will come out of this network, and kind of how to bring them to bear on enhancing practice and kind of spreading the word that nonviolent protection can actually work. So we have a range of kind of activities that we have already started doing. There's something we call the Research Cafe, which is basically a monthly Zoom meeting where people from different parts of the world can join. We try to time it at the like what is around midday in the UK. So hopefully it's not too early for people in Colombia, not too late for people in the Philippines. Where we talk about different topics that might come up and that we find relevance. For example, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about kind of the overlaps and differences between unarmed civilian protection, civil resistance, and human rights defense, and kind of had a discussion around that. So there's kind of a space there for people to exchange on things they would like to exchange about. Then we had and we will be having training workshops, for example, on research methods. So the different, our different partner universities in the different regions organize such methods. But we are also thinking that we will be able to put on more workshops, all online at the moment, on specific training needs. So if our researchers say they would like to know more about a specific arts-based method, for example, we can find somebody to give such a workshop. And we also offered some training on unarmed civilian protection based on a training manual that the organization Nonviolent Peace Force kindly made available to us. And so there has been an opportunity to take that course, and there will be more opportunities to do so in future as well. We've also started to work on a research database, so to basically gather information about all the research that is already out there on unarmed civilian protection and community self-protection, and kind of topics relating to it. And we just try to add information about as many kind of reports and articles and books and so on as possible, also in different languages. So we started with English, but we also try to expand more into work in other languages as well, so that it's easier for us as researchers to see what is already there and what we can build on. And there's information on our website how to actually get access to that database. So it's open for people to use. And then obviously what we are here for, kind of that third strand I was talking about, which is funding for research. So we have two different types of research projects. One are kind of what we've called work packages. So they are undertaken by project partners who are among partners that I talked about. Some of these projects are already on the website. You can have a look at what people are planning to do. There will be, I think, 12 of these projects, around about 12, done by our core partners. And today we're going to talk about the additional funding we have that we want to give away through an open funding competition. Now, what is it that we're interested in? So I guess you're all here because you have an idea that whatever you do might be what we are interested in. But just to say, there's so much kind of need for kind of protection of civilians around the world, as you all will know, because you're working in this area. I mean, the latest figure, when I wrote this application for this research network, the UN Refugee Agency figure for people who had been forcibly displaced by violent conflict was I think 62 or 64 million. Now we are already at 82 million or over 82 million in this official figure. So there's kind of a growing need really to think about protection of civilians from political violence. And also, I mean, it's quite clear when we look at the figures that the majority of deaths in conflict are not among necessarily the soldiers or the rebels involved, but among civilians. So I think the need is quite clear. But if you look at both kind of the research literature, but also where donors put their money in terms of protection work, then there's a clear focus on armed actors. And there's this vision that kind of protection from violence can only be done with kind of the use or threat of violence. And I think the work of kind of, here it says there are over 40 international NGOs. I think we've now already discovered many more than that, and many, many more organizations at national and very local levels that are doing kind of non-violent types of proactive protection strategies to protect other civilians or themselves from violence, shows that there's a kind of a growing network or a growing field of nonviolent protection by unarmed civilians. And this is kind of this is the thing we are interested in. So this is what we want to understand more of, and this is what we think should be growing. So there is a certain kind of normative driving force behind this network, as well as that those of us who are committed to this think there should be more of this unarmed civilian protection work. So just kind of in our proposal on our website, we've used this definition of unarmed civilian protection by Oldenhuus and colleagues, where they say it's the practice of civilians protecting other civilians in situations of imminent, ongoing, or recent violent conflict. It involves trained international civilians protecting local civilians, or local civilians protecting each other, or even local civilians protecting international or non-local civilians. So a very broad understanding. So this is not necessarily only about international organizations coming into other countries, but it is about the very kind of local grassroots self-protection measures that people take to protect themselves and their communities as well. So now, what are these research grants? We hope, so we have a budget, and it will depend a little bit on how much money people are applying for, but we hope we will be funding between 15 and 20 research projects with a focus on unarmed civilian protection, quite broadly conceived. Because our network has an end date when we have to finish our spending and our activities, we assume that these projects will take up to 16 months and that they will start between 1st of October and 1st of December 2022. So there's the funding competition first, and obviously the selection process, but then there's also a process of signing contracts, putting all sorts of payment things into place and so on. So Katja will talk a bit about that perhaps, but there's a lot going on before projects can actually start their work. So we assume start dates will be between 1st of October and 1st of December 2022, and then up to 16 months. The focus has to be on research. So this, while we are interested in the practice of nonviolent protection, this is a research network and we have research funding. So there has to be some sort of element of research in the project. It can have, of course, kind of impact activities attached to it, but it's not sufficient to apply for kind of humanitarian activities to protect civilians in conflict. This is not funding for kind of the practice of unarmed civilian protection, but to understand more of this practice and thereby hopefully enhance it or help to solve potential problems there might be. And we have kind of, so to make it easier to understand also kind of what type of questions we might be interested in, we have outlined 3 research themes. So these 3 themes are, again, very broad. And if you look into our call call specifications, there's a whole list of potential questions projects could ask under each of these themes. And it's not an exhaustive list, it's just an indication of what it could be that people might want to look at. But kind of one fundamental thing that struck us as interesting was to look at kind of vulnerability to physical harm and violent conflict, and attached to that also the notion of agency. So who is actually vulnerable to particular types of violence in particular kind of contexts, kind of which situations require protection, how does that depend on also kind of the identity and positionality of the people who are concerned, and kind of what protection strategies do these different vulnerabilities require. I think one thing that struck me when I started looking into this field was how often kind of the first notion we have of vulnerable groups are, for example, children, women, the elderly, which are all very vulnerable groups. But when it comes, for example, to forced recruitment, then young men are usually the most vulnerable group to this particular type of violence. And I think we need to have a kind of a more differentiated picture of what it is that we are trying to address here. The second kind of strand is about building local protection infrastructures. That sounds now a bit technical, but the idea is to understand how kind of different protection strategies, be it by outside organizations coming into a context, or by kind of national protection or self-protection initiatives at a very local level, how can they work together to kind of get the best results, so to speak, of protection for people, and without undermining each other. And I think there are kind of wider questions attached to this. So you could think about, I don't know, protective accompaniment by international organizations, where it's clearly kind of also based on the idea that they are foreigners who are perhaps white and blonde in a country of the global south, kind of protecting because of who they are, what their passport is, and so on, which at the same time raises questions, for example, about kind of the colonial undercurrents basically upholding this work. So it's really a question of how to build the best kind of interplay of different protection strategies to protect people from violence, and to also do this in a sustainable way. And then the last one here, the last theme is about developing civilian protection capabilities. So kind of a bit the look into the kind of the view into the future, to understand or kind of to ask whether this type of work that's already been done could be scaled up in terms of kind of, I don't know, bigger projects or missions, for example, or whether it can be broadened out in size or in scope. Can more communities in need kind of benefit from unarmed civilian protection strategies? Could new actors take on this work, or would that somehow undermine what is being done already? Can there be collaborations also perhaps with armed actors or not? So there are lots of questions around this. And I guess the question is really how to make, so if we find that this is a worthwhile undertaking, then to make this available for more people in need, and make this more of a kind of go-to option or vision for security, which is not based necessarily on violence. I think this is my last slide before I hand over to Katja. So kind of what kind of research methods are we looking for? There's nothing in particular that you cannot do. So we can imagine all sorts of methods being used in research projects. And we have here, so if you go further down on that list, there's kind of the classic things many organizations and many researchers do, like focus group discussions or interview-based research, or even kind of household surveys, archival research, and so on. But we have kind of looking at what kind of protective accompaniment work actually is based on. We have kind of the sense that there might be other methods that are more in tune with the idea of actually being by the side of people who who are under threat, and kind of working with people and kind of taking this primacy of local actors seriously, which we think would be great if that was also reflected in research on unarmed civilian protection, right? So just as most organizations we've spoken to would say, well, they work with people on the ground, kind of, they don't take decisions for them, but together with them, and they're locally led and so on. We think that things like participatory action research or other community-based research methods where the community is part of the research, or for example, also arts-based and creative research methods, which offer different types of expression, I would say, might be a way forward and thinking about it. So all of what is on this slide here and more is possible, but I think it's a matter of kind of explaining how the methods chosen best fit the purpose of the research, so to speak. So if it's kind of a more historical kind of focus, then maybe archival research might be the right thing to do. So I mean, having spoken to several organizations, I know that there's a lot of kind of knowledge already there, which organizations usually don't have the time to look into, to kind of what it really means, what all that material that they've collected over the years tells them about their practice and about perhaps how what to keep and how to change other things. So that would be a very worthwhile type of research, to just do archive research on data that is already there, so to speak. But if it's more about actual data generation in the field, then at least we would encourage to kind of think what methods would be best suited to find the answers to your questions. Now, we are funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which means one thing in terms of the approach or the methods used, or kind of the wider embedding of the projects. So all projects must include some form of element that would count as arts and humanities. And this could be, so arts and humanities is a range of different academic disciplines, for example, involving history or social anthropology, but also law or media studies. So either the research questions or kind of the conceptual approach, or maybe some methodologies should be from relevant academic disciplines who fall into this arts and humanities remit. And I'm pretty sure we have a link in our call specifications where there is a list of all the different disciplines and where it comes from. But if you think about involving an arts-based method such as photo voice, for example, so working with photography to ask particular questions, then that would already be this arts and humanities element. Or if you focused on a kind of historical approach to looking at vulnerability, then that would be an arts-based, arts and humanities element in there. And we also think that this arts and humanities-based element could be, for example, in the dissemination methods of the research. So ideally, every project would think about how to actually bring across whatever findings we have. And there could be a way of thinking about arts, especially the arts, I think, in terms of how we disseminate these findings. So if you build an arts-based methodology, it's also good to think about some sort of exhibition, or if you work with drama and some sort of kind of work that might come out of it, which may also serve the purpose of actually bringing across whatever the project found to others to their benefit. I hope I've said everything, Katja. If not, just feel free to add, and I hand back over to you.
No, that covers everything. We offer, the Creating Safer Space Network offers two different kinds of grants. We offer a small grant and a large grant. So the small grant is 20,000 to 30,000 British pounds, while the large grant is 30,000 to 100,000 GBP. For both the small grant and the large grant, you can look at any of the three research themes that Berit discussed previously. But for the large grant, we do particularly encourage systematizing work, comparison between different conflict situations, or South-South collaboration. For the small grant, projects can focus on conflicts in any eligible low and middle income country. But for the large grant, at least 50% of the research focus must be on conflicts in Colombia, South Sudan, Myanmar, or the Philippines. The small grant is open to both research-oriented organizations as well as practice-oriented organizations, such as non-governmental organizations. But for the large grants, we are particularly targeting this at experienced research teams who are employed by organizations with significant experience of supporting research projects. So we anticipate that most of these large grants will probably go to universities or similar research organizations. In terms of who can apply for funding, each project will include a principal investigator who leads the research and who applies for funding on behalf of their organization. This will be the lead organization on the project. I'm afraid we cannot accept applications from individuals. The lead organization in turn must be based in either the UK or in an eligible low and middle income country. So that unfortunately excludes China and India. If you go to our website and the call specifications, there's a full list of countries that are eligible there. Projects can also include co-investigators from organizations in almost any country in the world, but at least 70% of costs must go to organizations in the UK or in eligible low and middle income countries. If the lead organization is based in the UK, they must include co-investigators or project partners from eligible low and middle income countries. In terms of outputs, all projects are required to produce one or more outputs, but we do not specify exactly what kind of output that should be or how these should be disseminated. That will depend on the nature of your project. In thinking about what outputs to produce, it helps to think about two different questions. So firstly, who might be interested in your research? And secondly, how can you best reach out to them? Since these are research projects, we hope that most of your projects will be of interest to an academic audience of some kind. And then examples of outputs include articles for academic journals, book chapters, conference or seminar papers, or working papers. The Creating Safer Space Network will soon be launching a working paper series on unarmed civilian protection. So you would be very welcome to propose to create a working paper for the new working paper series, if you would like. We are nevertheless also hoping that projects will, in the long term, also help to protect civilians in the context of conflict. So please think carefully about ways to reach out to people outside academia who might be interested in your project. This could be specific communities experiencing conflict. It could be humanitarian organizations that are supporting them, or it could be policymakers at different levels. Potential outputs could include leaflets or booklets, policy briefings, reports, training materials, public engagement events, documentaries, digital resources, comics, exhibitions, or performances. And as Berit mentioned, that could be particularly useful if you're using art-based research methods, then you might have suitable dissemination strategies out of that. The funding the hope is that funding will cover the costs associated with research project. And that includes not only direct costs, such as costs for travel to attend fieldwork or to employ a translator to ensure you can communicate with the communities that you're working with, or the employment of a research assistant to support the project. But it also includes the funding that you as an investigator, funding to cover the time that you as an investigator commit to the project, as well as any overheads associated with the project. The criteria for funding are described in more detail in the call specifications, but briefly, the funding panel will be looking at the project's research quality and importance, including the extent to which the project meets the aims of the Creating Safer Space network. They'll be looking at the suitability of the people involved in the project and the research team, as well as the management plans and whether you have set aside appropriate timescales for all the activities. They'll be looking at whether the project represents good value for money, and whether the plans for outputs and the strategies for disseminating those outputs are appropriate. And finally, there's quite a few eligibility criteria in the call specifications, so I'm afraid all of those need to be met as well. If you'd like to apply for funding, which we very much hope you do, the application forms must be sent to us by the 15th of April, along with the supplementary documents that are described on our website. I would recommend having a look at the frequently asked questions at an early stage, because it contains detailed information about how to answer all of the questions on the application form. Applications must be submitted in English. Application in Spanish will also be accepted, but only if you contact us at least 1 month before the application deadline, so that we can arrange for reviewers who can assess your proposal. We are also hoping to have some workshops on how to write grant applications, so please do subscribe to our newsletter if you would like to find out more about these. There will be some time now for questions, but there will be more information available on our website and through our newsletter. But I'll send out details to everyone who registered to make sure you have access to these after the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Katja.
I'm going to stop the recording and then we can move on to questions and answers.